few years ago, I began a new spiritual journey. I was raised a Christian, but tired of my confusion and denying my gifts, I decided to take a new path of discovery and internal growth. Along the way, one thing I realized was how many others are in a similar place in their lives, knowing there's more, but stuck in their own conditioning or doubt. So I decided to start this podcast as a way of vocalizing the things I was learning. But then it became something more. I decided to blend my own quest for self-discovery with a deep dive into the fascinating world of Cajun culture. We'll unravel the unexpected connections between these two paths and how they play a unique role in guiding us towards healing and growth, hopefully while offering insights and inspiration. I'm Heather, and this is Soulful Wanderings with the Pretend Cajun. Are you coming along for the ride? Hi guys, hope everyone's doing okay. I want to say quickly, I'm sorry that things have been a little inconsistent lately. Lifed a little bit, so I've been a little off schedule in getting things out, but hopefully that's getting a little better, and some of that's going to change as we get into the new year. But at the time of this recording, we are actually into December, probably almost halfway, I think. So the holidays are actually in full swing here. And I'm somebody who, I've always really loved Christmas. It's my favorite time of year for really as long as I can remember. And, my mom, she always loved it too. And maybe that's what made me love it so much, watching her and her enjoyment of it. And of course, as a kid, I like the presents. I'm not going to deny that. But there was something else about it that was just really magical. And again, I think a lot of that was my mom and how it was her favorite time of year. So she cooked so much food every year. And it was amazing. And one thing I always found funny, and when I tell people this story, they always laugh. Everyone got their favorite dessert. Now, of course, there were 5 of us in the family, so you would end up with basically 4 or 5, even 6 desserts, which is insane for that number of people. But, she wanted us to have the thing that we liked. So I thought it was really sweet that everyone kind of had their favorite dessert that was for them. And of course, then as I got older and got into college, kind of got even better. Because, after the holidays, there were all those little Tupperware containers that were full of all that leftover goodness that were sent home with me to enjoy. And I can remember a few times that I even got a whole pie, my favorite pie, to myself. It was to send back with me to share with my friends. So it was always just really special that, my mom just loved things to be perfect, really. And to be special. So she went to all this trouble, all this special care to make sure that she got us gifts that she knew we would love. Often things that we wanted or needed. Back then, of course, a lot of times you got clothes and things like that. But maybe that pair of tennis shoes you'd really been wanting. Or one year I got this beautiful new coat and things like that. And I think there was also for me, it was kind of the best time of year because there was less fighting, the family was getting along. There weren't so many little squabbles and fusses happening. And the truth is, often most places you went, people were just kind of in a better mood. They were happy. They were enjoying that season. And of course, through all the years when I was a kid, you wanted Santa to come. Like I said, I'm not going to deny that the presents were a cool part of the season. And of course, we did. We used to track him on the radio on Christmas Eve. Do they still do that? I don't know how prominent radio is. I've seen them do it on TV. But as we were driving to my grandmother's house, they would talk about it on the radio that they had sighted him, over England or something, And so we were always tracking that and being excited about whether or when he would get to the house. And of course, y'all remember all the animated, or some of them were, I think they're claymation Christmas specials. You all know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, I remember all of them. The Grinch, Frosty the Snowman, Santa Claus is coming to town, Charlie Brown. We can't forget Charlie Brown. And of course, y'all, we watched all of them. That's one of the things that made the season so fun. Now, back then, I think we only had 3 channels on our TV, so there weren't a lot of choices. But still, it's what you did because those were part of your favorite holiday traditions. And of course, for us, so was Jesus. I mean, I was raised a Christian, and every year, that's what you heard in church. You know, you heard this story of his birth. And so you heard about the manger and the wise men and all of the things. And you sang the Christmas hymns. And there was always a play at Christmas. And of course, we were always in the play. And, you know, Jesus was the reason for the season. Now, of course, as I've gotten older and when I became a parent myself, you know, some of those things changed. But I do admit there are times when I wonder if I'm kind of a clone of my mom, because there are certain things for me that they have to be perfect. All the things have to be perfect. I think it's an OCD thing or something. I don't know. But I do all the things. I cook the food. I cook, you know, the Christmas food. I buy the presents. I want them to be the perfect presents. I want it all to be perfect. And I think part of that is because I want my family to have that same enjoyment that I had. And so for me, a lot of doing it is kind of, I did it the way mom did it, you know, because, well, that's the way I was raised. That's what I knew. And in my eyes, she was always spot on. I mean, when she did these things, in my eyes, they were perfect. I mean, did things always go perfectly? Of course they didn't. But like I said, to me, it was perfect because we were all together and there was all the love and there was so much enjoyment. But again, as an adult, you know, I want it to be perfect. So when things go wrong, I kind of struggle with that a little bit. Anyway, I digress. But of course, you know, in our little family, we did the same where we encouraged the Santa waiting game. You know, you did the cookies. You know, we got the gifts ready on Christmas Eve so that we could open them Christmas morning. There was always the debate, you know, can we open one now? And so often there would be one, you know, that we would open on Christmas Eve or maybe do stockings or something like that. And of course, we watch the shows. I mean, a lot of that is what signifies that the season is here. You know, the first time Frosty or Here Comes Santa Claus, you know, comes on TV, you know, okay, well, the holidays are here. And of course, my son was in the plays at church. You did the Christmas Eve service. You sang the songs. All the things. All the same things. All the same traditions. And I guess truth is we kind of seamlessly combined the commercial and the religious side, you know, and I think a lot of people do that. It's just kind of how it is, I guess. It all sort of rolls in together for a lot of people. And often I never really considered where a lot of these traditions came from. Like I said, it was just what I knew. It's just what we did. It's what my mom did. It's what, you know, there were certain things we did with the grandparents and things like that. And of course, older me was more aware of the commercialism of the holiday and started to really understand how all of that was rolling in together. But, you know, I enjoyed it. It was fun. And the truth is, a lot of those things, they bring people joy. They're fun. They're harmless. You know, I don't think it takes away from the religious aspect of what's going on because it's all about that joy and happiness. So the truth is, I think I've always been okay with it and, you know, I participated in it because like I said, it's joyful. People are nicer. People are happier at this time of year. But I can't deny y'all these last few years have been harder. And I feel like part of that maybe is because my son's older, you know, Once he especially was an older teenager, it was just different. You know, you weren't looking for Santa really anymore. So that magic, it just wasn't the same. I tried, I still try. You do the decorations, you do the shopping, you try to get excited about, give me your list of what you'd like, or you start thinking about, what are those perfect things I'm going to start looking for. And of course we did the cooking. I'm Southern, food's a thing for us. And of course I've even over the time tried to teach him a little bit about how to cook some of these things. It's a challenge, everyone's working and cooking kind of at different times. So sometimes that can be a little bit of a challenge, but we're trying, want him to learn so that maybe he can carry on that tradition. And of course I've asked for help with the tree, maybe that'll get us in the mood. Every year we adopt a family that's in need. We do that as an entire family, my husband's family. I've asked him to help me shop because that's usually involving a mom and children. And so, try to get him involved. Come help me find the toys for the kids. Help me pick out what you think they would like. Even though he's a little bit older now, he tends to be in touch with what kids would like. So I'm just trying to, let's keep that magic going a little bit. Let's try to, feel it a little more. But y'all, the magic, that magic just isn't there for me anymore. It really hasn't been for a while. And I feel like this year's been especially hard. I think I've said this before that my son actually struggles with religion a lot. We had some things that happened within the church and whatnot. Plus he had his own thoughts about it as he went, and as he grew up, those things just kind of changed. So his thoughts about religion and have definitely changed. But when you take kind of the church aspect out of it and think about just a religion and God and things like that, I think he still believes in Jesus and God, and honestly, I think he still believes in all the things that we were taught, but I think he just has doubts, and like we said, Santa's a thing of the past for him, so it's just very different. And now we still carry on our family traditions, we like to have a meal together. We do our presents, and like I said, there are certain food that, to be honest, we really only have them around Christmas, and part of that's because they're not always the easiest thing to cook, and they're just kind of that tradition of a holiday meal, so we just sort of save it, and that's when we have it, is for our holiday meal. The things we do are really, they're more just about us now, and about us being together, and doing our special things together, which I guess in a lot of ways is what the holidays are about. And when I think back on the time with my family, with my mom and whatnot, when it was so enjoyable, there were years that were really lean, and we didn't get a lot of gifts. My parents always did okay. They were comfortable, we weren't overly rich or anything like that, but we were comfortable, and usually had the things we needed, and a lot of things we wanted. But there were, like I said, years that were really lean, and you just didn't get as much. And you know what? We didn't really care. I think Mom stressed over it more than we did. And I'm the same. If I feel like I need to go a little lean, I know a lot of us are struggling this year. Money's tight for so many people. I told somebody the other day, we may be making the most income-wise that we ever have. I'm not completely sure, but we still don't make a lot of money. We're not well off by any means. But we just seem to struggle more than we have. And we're like a lot of people, figuring out where we can trim and cut costs a little bit. And of course, I have a guilt about that, because I want everything to be perfect, and I want everybody to have everything that they want. But it still does go back to, as long as we're together, and as long as we can have that time together, to enjoy each other and to show our love for each other, maybe the rest of it doesn't matter as much. Anyway, that's another part of the conversation as well, I guess. But those are things that I think about lately, and that, like I said, even some of our traditions that are just us, it's just, our little family. But those are even hard sometimes. I mean, like I said, I stress myself out to get all the shopping done, to make sure I've planned the meals, that we have all the groceries that we need. And I mean, what if we have some guests that show up unexpectedly? Are we going to have enough food? Is everybody going to get enough? My mom used to do that all the time. Did you have enough? Do you need more? So it's just always something that the holidays just kind of become stressful all of a sudden. Did I make sure I invited all the family? Did I tell them? Did I spend money that we don't have, which is almost always a norm, to buy gifts that, let's be honest, all of us are adults in this house. We really don't need them. We tend to get what we want when we need it, right? A lot of us as adults. But for us, it's more about that act of opening the gift, and seeing if they like what you got. It's that tradition. Because to me, it's always more about the joy of giving someone something they'll love. But even that is sort of losing its luster. Because like I said, I feel like we're just stressing ourselves out for what? For gifts that we basically waited to buy so that it could be a Christmas gift. And again, we don't have small children around. I do have, some nieces and nephews and stuff that are younger. So there is still a little bit of that with them when we go to a family gathering. But, and maybe if I had small children, it would be different. But I've been feeling like this for a while. Maybe there's a lot of why involved. Do we know why we're doing this? And I mean, I ask myself, why? Is it beyond their religion thing? There's really just many reasons, I mean, we've talked about this ad nauseum, the religion questions, the church questions, why were we taught these things the way we were? Because there's definitely evidence that makes you pause that, I'm not sure that's actually the real story. But anyway, I should probably digress on that. But it does play into it some, because you start to wonder, well, what really is the truth here? And what really happened? Maybe it's okay to still celebrate, even though that's not exactly the way it happened. Let me get to that in just a second. But there's also that the world is just so fucked up, y'all. And it's hard to get past that. A little cheer and love is probably just what a lot of people need right now. Because, I mean, you're seeing so many people that are struggling. And then you have the ones that they still have little kids. So, they do all the things they're supposed to do. They get the gifts. They cook the food. They visit the family. They make sure to treat everyone fairly with the time they spend. Well, we've gone to this grandparent. Now we have to go to that grandparent. Spend the same amount of time. I can remember that. It's such a challenge. We're actually a little bit lucky in my family, if you want to call it lucky. A couple of us, we've lost our parents and whatnot. So, my husband's family, that's what the family we have. So it makes figuring out schedules a little easier. That's for sure. I do have some other family that I go see, but it's just, we can handle it a little differently. It's a really unfortunate way to have that situation, but I know so many people that, you've got the different grandparents, you've got step parents, you've got divorced couples that are having to figure out how to split time with the kids and all that. It's so much on so many people, and it's so much stress. And then look at how many people are just, they spend money that they don't have. And then what did I say? I know a lot of people that do this. Then you judge yourself for what you weren't able to do, or maybe you just don't want to do it. And of course, then you start to judge yourself. Well, does that mean that my kids didn't have a good Christmas because I didn't do that? So it's just this whole stress ball in so many ways, and it's so frustrating. But maybe it's, like we were talking about before a little bit, I guess, that it's also the more I learn, the more I recognize how much of this is just made up, you know, and it kind of dulls that magic too. Maybe if I had a young child, it would be different. But like I said, even the couple that are in my life, they're not really helping those feelings a lot. I mean, I want to do something for them, of course, and I love them. I still get them things, and I get excited for getting those things. And I still have a love for that look, you know, on the child's face when they open up a gift around Christmas or Christmas morning, and, you know, when it's something that they love. But that seems to be more about the feeling and the family tradition and the love, right, than the actual acts of what we're doing. So anyway, I feel like, gosh, I'm being a Debbie Downer, y'all, talking about how I can't get into Christmas. It's not that. I still have a lot of joy around it. I'm questioning a lot of things. You guys know this. I'm trying to figure out this whole journey and what's going on. And I'm just struggling right now with being really into it the way I have been in the past. So I think it feels like a little bit of a loss because, you know, I'm looking at myself going, why are you so different? And I guess I want to try to get a handle on it, kind of figure out maybe I can change that. Maybe I can make it better. So I decided to do some research on Christmas because the truth is I hear people make comments a lot, but I don't really know a lot about it. I know what I was taught, but I didn't question it a lot. I was like a lot of people. I didn't question it. I just took what they told me and I didn't really do research beyond it. So I wanted to talk about Christmas. What is it really? Where'd it come from? And while we're at it, we're going to talk a little bit about Yule. I honestly didn't know about Yule until recently. Just never paid attention or really hadn't been a part of my world. And then I started to see how much of it is intertwined in what I would call a traditional holiday or Christmas celebration. And I wondered how many other people realize how much this intertwining happens in the holidays. You know, how many traditions were created for reasons that have nothing to do with religion and Jesus. And like I said, I'm like many people. I just kind of went with what I was taught. I never did any research beyond that. I just took it as this is the tradition that we have in my family. It's very similar to a lot of other people that I know. So I guess I sort of extrapolated that probably very similar to what a lot of people do, which is really not true. People do very different things depending on who they are, what culture they're from, and whatnot. But are there similarities at their core? Maybe. So let's start with Christmas, which is celebrated on December 25th, as most of us know. For many people, it's a sacred religious holiday. That's how I was raised. And for many of those, and you know, for others, it's a part of cultural as well as commercial endeavors. And it actually started a couple thousand years ago, y'all. As we said, you know, the Christians celebrated the birth of Jesus of Nazareth on this day. And it actually was named a federal holiday in the U.S. in 1870, which if you think about it in the span of 2,000 years, that is pretty recent. So many of the traditions included in this holiday are things, some of I mentioned before, things like exchanging gifts, decorating a tree, sharing a meal with family or friends. Maybe you attend church, and of course, let's not forget Santa. But when did all this start? Well, the truth is it was long before Jesus, to be honest. It was a time of celebration during the winter solstice. And this was as they moved from basically the worst part of winter, and they were moving into longer days and sunlight. Sunlight was coming back. The Norse would celebrate Yule starting on December 21st, and they would go through January. And that's what they were celebrating, that the return of the sun. And one of the things they would do is they would light these really large logs, and the people would celebrate and they would feast for as long as the logs burned. And there were times when that could be up to 12 days. That's a long time, y'all. There were many areas of Europe where this was a time of celebration for many reasons. Drinks like wine and beer that they had made earlier in the year, well, those were now ready to drink. And it was also a time that, of course, back then, it was a time that they would slaughter some of their cattle. Basically, they didn't want to have to feed them during the winter, and it was also fresh meat. So what does that mean? Drink, fresh meat, must mean a feast. So that's what they would do. And y'all, the Romans, they celebrated big. They celebrated Saturnalia, I think is how you say it. And that was to honor Saturn, who is the god of agriculture. And they would begin the week leading into the winter solstice. And then, of course, it went on for about a month. And y'all, they really celebrated lots of food and drink. And basically, they would sort of close down, the shops and whatnot. They would just close down to celebrate. And I found this interesting in the research because, of course, there were slaves, unfortunately. There's been slaves throughout time. In fact, there's still some that are enslaved people in different countries, but that is a totally different conversation. But the interesting thing, according to research, is that the Romans would often actually free their slaves for this time. So I found a lot of that very interesting. They also celebrated Juvenalia, I believe is proper. And that was to honor the children of Rome. And they would also celebrate Mirtha's birthday. And that is the god of the unconquerable sun. That was also on December 25th. So Christians celebrate the birth of Jesus at this time, as we said. But a lot of the question that many people have that have researched and kind of maybe looked into some of this, was Jesus really born on December 25th? And there are some historians, theologians even, that will say no. They said that the Bible actually doesn't really say when he was born. And there's an argument to be made for the fact that shepherds probably wouldn't have been herding at that time of year. There are actually some other things, some other examples that are brought up at times that this time of year really doesn't add up, that it really adds up to be more likely in the spring. But I actually see even more people that say it was probably during the summer when he was actually born. So now back in the beginning of Christianity, Christians really only celebrated Easter. They didn't celebrate the birth. So Pope Julius I chose December 25th as the day to celebrate. And there are some that believe that there were reasons behind this, that the church wanted it to be popular. So, of course, you've got all these festivals and such that go with the winter solstice that were happening at that time. That would have been around the time of the Saturnalia festival. Y'all, I hope I'm saying that right. And, of course, some of these other celebrations that were happening. And I believe the church, or a lot of people believe, that the church sort of wanted those celebrations to sort of be absorbed because they were all around the same time. Now, evidently they didn't tell people how to celebrate, but it's fair to say that by the Middle Ages, that Christianity had really mostly replaced a lot of the pagan religions. So it's fair to say that's when a lot of this basically changed. I learned this too, and I thought this was fascinating, especially living in South Louisiana. The early days of a lot of these celebrations apparently were pretty sort of drunken affairs. I saw it described one place as similar to what Mardi Gras would be like today. That's That's a pretty big celebration, y'all. And they said that the poor would ask the rich for food and drinks. And that if they didn't get it, they may do something that where they're kind of a little mischievous, was how they described it. I don't think it was anything really bad. Like I said, just a little mischievous, but still. But evidently what it morphed into was the more rich, upper class people would entertain the more poor or less fortunate. And they actually described it as they were paying a debt to society. I don't know about you guys, but there's some of this that it doesn't feel like the things we do now. The celebrating of the winter solstice and the sun returning and things like that. That's not similar to what we do now. But let's keep going here. So Christmas in the U.S. actually didn't even happen at first when the folks that came over here. There wasn't Christmas at first. There were actually some areas that allowed it, but then there were others that they actually outlawed it. They didn't want it happening. Then in 1870, that's when it was made the federal holiday, remember? And they later, basically they sort of transformed it from this carnival style holiday, which I think was possibly the reason why they weren't really wanting it to happen, into what we see now, where it's more family centered and it's more about peace and love. In fact, there's a book. It's called the Sketchbook of Jeffrey. I'm going to say Joffrey Crayon. It was a series of stories that had actually helped bring about this idea of peace. So of course there were class issues in the U.S. society, as there are in many societies. And what this did was it gave this picture of peace and harmony. And so of course that's the thing they sort of promoted and wanted to happen. And then A Christmas Carol came around. And again, you had this message of goodwill, so it was the thing that they were really talking about and really kind of pushing. You also saw a time when people were looking for a way to give to their children. So the Americans were really embracing this family holiday idea. Imagine that. The ideas were adopted largely from these creative offerings that were around at the time, Christmas Carol, the book, and whatnot. So as the Americans, the people in the U.S., as they built this holiday for themselves, what ended up happening is they kind of pieced together things from their different cultures and ended up, I guess they really created their own idea of what Christmas should be. Thought that was kind of neat. I mean, you have all these different people from different places that had come to the country. So it makes sense that you would pull from all these different countries. So it's kind of fun. Okay, so now here's the big question. How does Santa fit into all this? How did all this religious and winter solstice, all the things, become Santa? Well, Santa Claus, or St. Nicholas, as some of us call him. Well, St. Nicholas was real, y'all. I don't know if you knew that, but there really was a St. Nicholas. He was born in Turkey. They believe it was somewhere around 280 AD. And he actually traveled around. He would help the poor and the sick. And he became known as the protector of children and sailors. And then they said in the late 18th century, there were Dutch families in New York who would celebrate the anniversary of his death. And they called him Sinterklaas. Y'all cannot even come close to doing an accent like that, but you get the idea. And that was for short. And so the name Santa Claus kind of drew from there. Then it goes even further. There was an Episcopal minister by the name of Clement Clark Moore. And he wrote a poem about the St. Nicholas, and it became known as "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," because that was the first line, or that's from the first line. And it was about Santa and his reindeer and all those things, and that was part of the poem. Well, then later there was this cartoonist named Thomas Nast, and he drew this St. Nicholas that's based on the poem, and old St. Nick was born. A bit of a mixture of all of those things. So I thought that was kind of neat as well. But the interesting thing about this is, so Christmas seems to have become, universally known over all of these years. But like we said, there are many of these traditions that were borrowed or kind of grew or morphed into something based on a story or an older tradition or something like that. So I find all that very interesting. So let's talk about a few of the things that go with Christmas that we all tend to do around Christmas time. For instance, Christmas trees. Those largely came from Germany because decorating evergreen trees was part of the German winter solstice celebration. Poinsettias were named after Joel R. Poinsett. He was a minister in Mexico, and he brought these beautiful plants, these red and green plants, back to the United States. This was around 1828, I believe. And later, they started selling them at greenhouses in the U.S. And by about 1900, they think it basically had become a universal symbol of the season. How many of you seen Christmas cards? Well, those have actually been traced back to England and a man named John Calcott Horsley. So those have been around for a long time too. Of course, mass production, and then not even mass production, but the postal service and things like that, as that became more prominent and easier to use, it was easy to send those greetings. So that's pretty neat too. Mistletoe. How many of you have ever been kissed under the mistletoe? Well, mistletoe was actually thought to have magic powers by the Celts, and they would hang it to ward off evil spirits, but to also bring good luck. So they would kind of hang it around their house. And then when you got to the Victorian era was when this kissing tradition began. They would hang it around in their doorways and such. And the truth is, kissing wasn't really a normal thing in their society. So this kind of gave you a little reason, maybe a little excuse to do that. So that was kind of neat. Figgy pudding. How many of you have ever had figgy pudding? I've never had figgy pudding. I see it all the time, different shows and cartoons and songs, whatever. I've never even seen any, I don't think. But it's actually plum pudding, and it goes back to the Middle Ages. So that's been around forever. Caroling. Do any of you go caroling? We used to do that with the youth group at the church. They would go caroling. Door to door is a little different, depending on the neighborhood you live in, I'm assuming. But that actually began in England. And there were musicians that they would travel around and they would play, but they would do it, kind of specifically at the homes of the richer folks in town. And they were looking for money or perhaps a hot meal for their entertainment. And y'all, guess what the stocking story is? This is what I found. I think it's actually really cute. And this actually goes back to St. Nicholas. So the legend goes that there were 3 sisters, and they were too poor to marry because their father, he didn't have anything as a dowry to offer. So the father was actually intending to sell them because, that things happen like that then. Anyway, so St. Nick left each of them gold coins. But evidently, one of them actually went down the chimney and landed in the shoes that they had left by the hearth, which there are a couple of cultures that do that as well, that leave their shoes by the hearth. And that another went in to a pair of stockings that had been left to dry by the fire. So, of course, now that tradition has continued. Leave your stocking by the fire for it to be filled with goodies from St. Nicholas. How fun is that, huh? Now, of course, there are more. Of course, there are more. There's so many more, so many different traditions and cultures and all the things. But I just wanted to give you an idea that so many of these things started, like we said, that the coin just landed in the stocking. And that's how that tradition began. So there are so many ways that these things came to be. And it's, what is it? You play the game of telephone, and by the end, the story's completely different. Maybe that's a little bit of how these traditions have kind of changed. But at least gives you a little bit of an idea of how some of this stuff happened. So let's talk a minute about Yule. I really knew nothing about Yule. Actually, I knew more than I thought. I didn't realize it was attached to Yule, though. But we mentioned before that the Norse celebrated the winter solstice, and the Yule log that you hear about all the time, that came from their celebration of burning a log, for a long period of time. Of course, how often do we see that? Y'all, did you know there's a video on YouTube that it's just a burning log in a fireplace? It's just a video of that, and it kind of crackles, and it's called a Yule log. Didn't even know why. I felt so stupid. I'm like, I'm today years old when I learned that. I put it on my TV a lot during Christmas, when everybody's over, maybe for dinner, or when we're cooking and whatnot, and we put on some music, and we have a little Yule log on the TV. It's just kind of nice and peaceful. I mean, I don't have a fireplace, so next best thing. But there are some other things that are considered Yule traditions, and they're tied to the celebrations of the winter solstice. The evergreens, I know we said it was a German thing, but there's a lot of folks that did this. Those evergreens were cut and brought inside because they're a symbol of life and rebirth. So there were some that thought they basically had power over death, and that they were used to defeat the winter demons. So they would use them for that. Holly, you've seen holly around for Christmas a lot, right? But holly was a symbol of hope and the holly king. Now, of course, the red berries represent potency. And so it was thought that this holly was able to ward off evil spirits, because, it's prickly. Holly's, it's pokey, so they thought it would ward off the evil spirits. And of course, it's thought to represent a masculine element. We talked about mistletoe. That's often something that was used in the winter solstice celebrations. This would be the female element. And it was believed that the leaves represented the mother goddess and her fertility. So it was used in a lot of druid ceremonies for the winter solstice. They would catch the falling branches because they wanted to preserve that energy. They felt like if they hit the ground, that energy would go back into the earth. So I thought that was neat. So they would then hang it, or they would wear the mistletoe. Again, the fertility thing. So, I think sometimes they would even hang it on their bed and things like that, because of course, they wanted to have children and things. So I thought that was fascinating. Had no idea. Candles have been used for literally eons. They represented a light in the home and the warmth of the sun. Makes perfect sense, right? Wreaths were used for many, many years and back during those celebrations because they symbolized the wheel of the year. And, often things that are in a circle, wedding rings, things like that, that circle is this symbol of infinity. And so this symbolized the infinity of goodwill and friendship. So I thought that was really nice. I mean, think about it. A lot of us hang a wreath on a door. So if you think about it from that way, it kind of symbolizes that goodwill and friendship, kind of welcoming, right? So I thought that was kind of fun. Bells. How often do we see bells around this time of year? Then they were rung to drive away demons. Makes sense for me. Gingerbread, y'all, this was one I really didn't know this one. Apparently gingerbread was actually it was a specialty. It was hard to come by, and it was brought back in the 11th century. That would be by the Crusaders. And so, like I said, it was kind of hard to come by. It was very special. And so since it was so special, it was only allowed to be used in winter. So guess when the perfect time to do that is? That would be your Yule celebrations. Another thing I found interesting was the colors of Yule were red for the Holly King, green for the Waxing Oak King, white was for purity and hope of new light, and then silver for the moon, and then gold for the sun. And of course, during a lot of these celebrations, there were also there were several gods and goddesses that were being honored or something like that. And we mentioned a few. And of course, there's more. There's more. The gods and goddesses. There's more of the things, the traditions and whatnot. But it's actually pretty in depth, and I don't know that we did go into all of that because there's some more that I want to discuss here. But I wanted to give you an idea of some of these things. So I think we've basically established that Yule was around the winter solstice. And one thing that I learned this actually recently, it's also on the wheel of the year, and you'll often see that with Wiccans. It's the wheel of the year is an annual cycle of seasonal festivals. And if you look at a wheel, you'll see the spring, summer, autumn, and winter solstices. And then, of course, there's other celebrations within each of those. But I do know that the winter solstice and Yule is something that you'll see a lot of Wiccans that's something that they celebrate. So like I said, there are so many things that I learned from all this research. So many that I didn't know that I really, I had no idea that Christmas here, that Christmas as I know it, was such of a mix mash of just so many different cultures and traditions. I mean, it was really fascinating how many of those things, they cross over and they are seen for, Christmas celebrations and Yule winter solstice celebrations and whatnot. It's really, really interesting. I also find it interesting, and I see people say this kind of a lot actually, that they'll say Christmas is just a bunch of pagan traditions that Christians are trying to own. And you know what? Most of my life, especially before I started this journey, I would have fought you on that. I would have said Christmas is when we celebrate Jesus. But they don't tell you the rest of this in Sunday school. They don't tell you that someone, a pope, okay, many years ago, he just decided, quote unquote, decided, they just picked a date. And they picked it with the purpose of growing its popularity to hopefully garner acceptance. And that truthfully, these people that are saying it's just pagan traditions that you're trying to own, that, okay, maybe they're a little bit right with that. And that truthfully, when you talk to religious scholars, Bible scholars, theologians, they tell you that most likely the story that we hear every year, that we do plays on, that we have hymns about, that it actually may not have gone exactly like we thought. Did you know there's thought that the wise men may not have actually shown up until Jesus was basically a toddler? The manger story may have been embellished a bit. And y'all, there's actually a lot more. If you really look at the stories and you start to break it down and you look at the translations and what's really being said and you put it into perspective and all those things, it may be it may have really gone down a little differently than we perceive it as. Takes a little bit of the passion out of it, doesn't it? And the truth is, I've really been trying to decide, well, where does all of this leave me? You know what I'm saying? I'm not sure how I really feel about it. You've got the different sides and you've got their different opinions. At the end of the day, I think there's a lot of people kind of fighting over ownership, over who's right. And the fact that their sides actually just makes me sad. It makes me so sad. That's why I'm doing this podcast too. But anyway, I think both sides are a little bit right and a little bit wrong. Let me try to explain that. Many Christians don't know all of this. And I said this before. They're following their faith. They're following what they were taught. Their Sunday school teachers, whoever it was. These were people that they trusted. And again, like I said before, there were many of them like me that just never thought to look beyond it. Now I know to make sure they're right. And I hate to even think that what you're being taught in a religious setting, that, well, hang on, let me make sure they're right about it. You feel like you should be able to trust people. And I just never thought anything of it. I always thought that these were old traditions that been carried on for generations. And I really never thought of where they came from. I just thought they were fun. Now, does that make us wrong? Does that make those people wrong? Okay, I guess sort of. Because, ignorance isn't an excuse. I get that. But sometimes you don't know any better and you have no reason to question it. And the truth is, they believe vehemently in their God and they believe vehemently in these stories. And they are defending it as they feel they should. And truthfully, they're doing what they were pushed to do, I guess. Or they only defend it when they feel like they've been pushed to do so. Otherwise, honestly, they're just happily celebrating. And they're celebrating their thing. And their thing is the birth of Jesus. So they are celebrating the birth of the Son of their God. And then you'll have some pagans. And I mean, look at me. Not all pagans. Okay, hear me. Not everybody's like this. So I'm not picking on anybody here. But for some reason, there are many that they seem to kind of always have a chip on their shoulder. They want to own all the things about all this because, it came from us. And in many ways, they do. Like I said, it came from them. It came from, pagan celebrations. Okay. But it's been adopted and it's been used by other cultures now. And I guess my question is it so wrong for that to happen? Is it so wrong for them to just kind of adopt these things that have become important to them? They don't mean any disrespect by it. It just kind of changed for them. In fact, for many of them, I don't think it means the same things to them. And I don't think that makes them wrong. I'm not sure that makes them wrong. It just makes it a little different. So maybe they don't understand the story behind the evergreens and what they really did. But for them, it signifies the celebration of this season. And the tradition is to cut a Christmas tree and decorate it in beautiful ornaments that remind them of things in their life or anything. Maybe I like it color coordinated because those are my favorite colors. Or I know people that they do a different theme every year. And it's just fun. And it makes it a way for them to celebrate. And to me, they're not hurting anyone. They've adapted a hundreds-year-old tradition. Okay, this is a long time ago. And they've adapted to what works for them and to what fits their family. I mean, is there really anything so wrong with that? Here's the rub that I see. Both sides have this chip. You'll have a lot of Christians that it's like they just think pagans are horrible people. I've literally seen people recoil when you say the word pagan. And it's like, y'all, it just means that they're not Christian. Okay, it's not a bad word. They aren't bad people. They just simply believe different. And to be fair, they've been around a lot longer than Christians have. And then you've got many pagans that are pagan because they were abused or in some way hurt by the church. And so therefore they're like, look, they've just washed their hands of it. And it's not just the church, okay? Because I think many of us can agree, even devout Christians can agree that there are churches that have some issues. But because it happened in a church, they are by association washing their hands of their religion. Which to me, to be fair, is fair. I mean, I get it. I get how they got there, Men are fallible. And so things go wrong. But to me, it's not fair to blame an entire religion for a few bad people. But you have a lot of pagans that, especially because of this, the church injury or whatever that they had, they basically hate Christians and they think they're horrible people. And to me, it's just so unfortunate. And unfortunate is not a good enough word for what that is. It's just the word, it's the word I have right now. Because all of it, let's be honest, how much of it is actually really a perception that's really just based in them not understanding each other. And how often do we do this? How often do we have something that we don't understand, and maybe it even scares us a little bit, that we lash out and we tend to project our own issues, our own fears, our own triggers. Like I said, those Christians that kind of recoil when they hear the word pagan, because I think there's some of them that well, if you don't have God in your life, then, they don't, they don't want to be in trouble or something because they kind of associated with you because, well, you don't believe. I mean, I don't want to risk getting into trouble for that, which is, I mean, but that's your own issue to be concerned with, because you know what, their religion and their belief is between them and God, or between them and their God that they believe in. That's on them. You represent God by who you are and how you act, so be representative of Christianity, so that maybe they learn, maybe they change their opinion, maybe they don't. But at the end of the day, the job of a Christian is to represent God and represent the goodness and the love. And I think some people lose that along the way when they encounter people that aren't like them. And again, vice versa. We all do it. But the truth is, if we actually took, just a minute and we listen to each other, and that begins with talking in a civil manner, by the way. Okay? You can't, have yelling and just sort of shutting down, all right? It's the act of actually talking, actually listening, and really hearing each other. I think we might be surprised how much we can learn from each other. And I believe if we did this, a lot of these traditions would begin to have a deeper meaning. And maybe you could add that to your celebration if you knew that meaning and were open to letting it in. Maybe we could open up a little bit and really see and acknowledge that this beautiful tradition that you had, it's been adopted and it's been made into another beautiful thing that holds great importance in someone else's family. To me, that's a gift. They're not trying to take anything away from you for that. It truly is a gift to them. And the truth is, okay, so people don't understand it, but they're using it in a time to celebrate peace and togetherness and love. I mean, if you're really mad at that, I have to wonder, maybe you should start to kind of look inside yourself and to figure out why. Okay, plus there's the whole thing that none of us alive today did any of this. Okay? This all came from decades, centuries, perhaps even a millennia ago. Maybe it was from an ancestral line of ours, I'll give you that, but we didn't create it. We're simply continuing what we were taught or grew up with. How do you know that even if it was from your ancestral line, are you still doing it exactly the way they did? Or have you adopted it for what works for you? And I mean, I get that there's an element of pride, of heritage in that. I get that, and that's great. I mean, you should be proud of that. I guess what I'm saying is I doubt anyone celebrating Yule or Christmas today is doing it with the malicious intent of offending anyone else with how they celebrate it. Just like I cook cornbread dressing every year. I follow my mother's recipe because that's what I know and that's what brings me joy. It's one of my favorite things. And it's not just because I think it's delicious. It's connected to the memories of my mom and the love we always had at the holidays. Those traditions, those things that we enjoyed doing. So I introduced it to my husband and my son, and they love it. They think it's delicious too. And it brings them joy. Another thing we do every year is we buy our son an ornament. And it's generally the one we choose. We try to find something that he's kind of into at the time. And of course, when he moves out, the idea is that these will all go with him. And then he will have things to decorate his own tree in his own home with. But it's just such a joy. Every year you take them out and get them ready to put on the tree, and you reminisce about those days, those memories, oh, remember when he was into this, and oh, remember when we found this. And those are the things that decorate my tree. That was once part of a pagan celebration connected to the winter solstice. And you know what? I love that someone shared it, because that beautiful tree is actually what signifies that the holidays have come in my house. And I love, love, love just sitting with myself and my own thoughts and just watching the lights and enjoying the peace and the happiness of the year. But this is what I mean by we make it our own. And I truly believe there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, it can actually be quite lovely. Again, to me, it's more of a gift, than a theft. Okay, so all of this to say that the truth is I'm still not sure how I feel about all this. I'm realizing almost daily that things aren't what they seem. They aren't what I was taught. And that there's more to the story. However, I also believe in God. I believe in Jesus. And I want to celebrate him. So I'm okay with it being Christmas in December, even if it was, quote unquote, chosen and maybe not entirely for the right reasons. People celebrate for the right reasons, and that's what's important, I think. I still find myself struggling with the why of it all, I guess. Maybe we should change and celebrate Jesus when we think he was actually born. But maybe the fact that we don't really know for sure, maybe December is just as good as any other time. And that is something that as a Christian, it's important to celebrate. One of the things I am struggling with, though, is why do we stress ourselves out for what is largely a commercial celebration? There's so much of it that's about the commercialism. But it doesn't have to be that. It can be for what you choose. Like I said, for celebrating Jesus. You can celebrate the winter solstice. It can be about Santa, if that's what you want. Maybe consider making it about St. Nicholas and giving to others, though. So I'm trying to find a reason for the season again. I enjoy the moments with my family, the peace, the love. Truth be told, that's how this all started for me and my family when I was a child. So maybe that really is what works for me, based on what I've learned in this research that was the goal of the celebration in the U.S. when it started here. We would wish others glad tidings, a good and prosperous new year. You know what, though? Come to think of it, these ancient solstice celebrations, they actually may have been a little more similar, huh? They celebrated the renewal of life, the coming of the sun, the desire for luck as the seasons changed and they would start with their crops and all as the winter went away. Okay, you know what? There are some similar themes there, aren't there? Maybe the core reasons were a little different, but I feel like the some of the overall ideas are kind of similar. You know, the goodwill and celebrating life. And the truth is, we all kind of we have a choice of how we choose to spend this time. We can make it joyful and a lovely time of celebration and happiness, or we can choose to allow these traditions and all these things to be stressful and probably lead to squabbles and things like that. I believe everybody has a right to make that choice. The right to choose what they celebrate and how they celebrate it. A right to worship, if that's what they're doing, but a right to worship without oppression or persecution. I mean, the truth is, that's kind of why we all came to America, right? But I believe part of doing that is maybe we need to be a little more open. You know, basically, we kind of need to do better. We need to check our emotions at the door and really listen to each other. And we need to be willing to stop jumping to judgment, right? Be willing to learn and grow. And hear me, I didn't say agree. You don't have to agree, but you can show respect. And if you truly set aside your personal projections onto the other person, you might actually be surprised with what you'll learn. So, if you were paying attention, I was paying attention after all this research. I think what I've noticed is that it's a lot like everything else. There's probably more to this story than you thought of before. And we're not so different after all. So this year, I'm going to try to choose to celebrate the core of what's always made Christmas special for me. And that's the peace and the love and the joy of my family, the blessings that we have. And for me, yes, I am celebrating Jesus' birth. So hopefully I can find a little of that magic again as we continue this holiday season. And so for all you guys, no matter how you choose to celebrate, let it fill you with those themes of peace and joy and welcoming light and celebration. Thanks for being here and listening. And I wish you all a happy, blessed, and joyful holiday season. Thanks so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure and like and rate and follow and do all the things for our podcast. It really does help us out. Links and any other important things you need to know will be in the show notes, so make sure to check those out. If you have ideas of topics you'd like to hear about or questions you want us to answer, drop those on the Pretend Cajun page on Facebook or Instagram. And if you're interested in Theta Healing or maybe a reading, head over to the website, which is pretendcajun.com, to schedule a time. In the meantime, take care of yourself and each other. Until next time.